In the autumn of 1947, a steamfitter named Gerald Oakes descended through a maintenance corridor beneath the Carnegie Corporation's headquarters on East 22nd Street in Manhattan that had been sealed, according to the building superintendent's log, since the winter of 1926. He carried a kerosene lamp, a folded work order stamped with the words "Pipe Survey," lower sublevel, and a handwritten note from the building manager that instructed him to go no further than the second sub-basement. The note had been underlined twice. The corridor he found was not on any blueprint he had been given. The walls were not bare concrete. They were lined, floor to ceiling, with wooden shelving units, iron bracketed and bolted into the stone, every shelf packed with crates, ledgers, rolled maps, and bound documents sealed in oilcloth. The smell, he later told his brother-in-law, was not mold or rot. It was wax and cedar. Preservation. Intentional preservation. By the time Oakes climbed back to street level, his work order was unfinished. His lamp had burned out twice, and he estimated he had walked no more than a third of the corridor's length. When he reported what he had seen to the building manager the following morning, his contract was terminated before noon. He was 51 years old. He had worked without incident for the same facilities management company for 14 years. The official record of Gerald Oakes's termination simply states, "Services no longer required." What the official record does not mention is that within 3 days of his dismissal, the building manager who had sent him into that corridor was himself transferred to a Carnegie Corporation property in Pittsburgh. Within 3 weeks, the maintenance company Oakes worked for lost its contract with every Carnegie-affiliated property in New York City. Oakes was not an eccentric. He was not a man prone to invention. He was a licensed steamfitter with a 14-year clean record and a pension he forfeited by being fired rather than quitting. His brother-in-law, a former Army Signal Corps officer named Philip Margrive, wrote down everything Oakes told him in November of 1947. That account remained in Margrive's private papers until his daughter donated them to a local historical archive in 1991. No one at the Carnegie Corporation has ever publicly acknowledged that Gerald Oakes existed. Before we go further, if you find these buried investigations as fascinating as I do, hit subscribe so the next one finds you when it drops. The algorithm tends to suppress this kind of research unless you tell it otherwise. To understand what Gerald Oakes walked into in 1947, you have to go back not just a few decades. You have to go back to 1889, a time when Andrew Carnegie was not yet the steel titan the history books describe, but something considerably more deliberate. Most accounts of Carnegie's philanthropy frame his library building program as an act of generosity. Between 1883 and 1929, Carnegie and his foundation funded the construction of 2,509 public library buildings across the United States, the United Kingdom, and beyond. The official story is simple. Carnegie believed in self-education and wanted to give working people access to books. That story is not wrong, but it is incomplete in a way that historians have chosen not to examine too carefully. What the standard account leaves out is that Andrew Carnegie was also, by 1895, one of the most aggressive collectors of private documents in the Western world. He employed a full-time archivist, a German-trained librarian named Heinrich Vollrath, who had previously worked for the Prussian State Library in Berlin, beginning in 1891. Vollrath had spent 12 years at the Prussian State Library, cataloging restricted diplomatic correspondence before emigrating to the United States in 1889. He was not a generalist. He was a specialist in the organization and concealment of sensitive materials, a man whose entire professional formation had been shaped by governments that understood exactly how much power resided in a controlled archive. Carnegie did not hire a librarian to shelve novels. He hired a man whose expertise was the kind of knowledge you do not put on public display. Vollrath's employment contract, portions of which survived in a Carnegie Steel Company ledger, discovered in a Pittsburgh estate sale in 2004, specified that he was responsible for the acquisition, cataloging, and secure storage of documents pertaining to industry, science, and the governance of men. That phrase, the governance of men, does not appear in any of Carnegie's published letters or public statements. It appears only once in that ledger, in a contract for a private archivist. Vollrath held the position until 1911. His name does not appear in any official Carnegie Corporation biography. There is no record of where he went after 1911. The Carnegie Corporation of New York was formally incorporated in 1911 with an endowment of $135 million, the largest philanthropic endowment in American history at that time. Its stated purpose was the advancement of knowledge. That is what the letterhead said. That is what the press releases said. But the corporation's first decade of operation was characterized by something the public record almost entirely omits: the systematic acquisition of real estate with deep or extensive subgrade construction in major American cities. Between 1912 and 1924, the corporation acquired or held long-term leases on properties in New York, Chicago, Boston, and Washington, D.C., several of which had been constructed with sub-basement levels that did not appear on public building permits. A 1922 internal document, a 78-page property inventory prepared by a Columbia-trained architect named Raymond Shear, described 3 New York City properties as having lower-level archival space not reflected in municipal filing. Shear submitted this inventory to the corporation's board in February 1922. The board minutes for that month contain no reference to it. The inventory itself was listed as received and filed with no further notation. What makes Shear's inventory significant is not merely what it described. It is what it implied. An architect does not write the phrase lower-level archival space not reflected in municipal filing and mean it casually. That phrase is a professional notation. It means that a licensed architect, conducting a formal property survey for a major institution, found finished, functional space underground that had been deliberately excluded from the city's building record. That is not an accident. That is not a paperwork oversight. Municipal filing for subgrade construction in New York City in the early 1920s was a legal requirement. Omitting it was not sloppy bookkeeping. It was a decision made by someone with the authority to make it, and the confidence that no one with jurisdiction would look too closely. Raymond Shear left the corporation's employ in June of 1922. 4 months later, he applied for a position with the New York City Department of Buildings. His application was rejected without stated reason. He spent the remainder of his career as a draftsman for a private residential firm in Queens. His daughter, in a 1978 interview conducted by a Columbia University oral history project on New York architecture, mentioned that her father had seen something at a downtown building that had upset him deeply, something he never fully described to the family. She said he had referred to it once, at a Christmas dinner in 1935, as the room they didn't build for books. She remembered he had said it quietly, and then changed the subject, and that her mother had given him a look that told the family not to ask further. Raymond Shear died in 1961. His professional papers, which his daughter believed had been donated to Columbia's architectural archive, could not be located by the university's librarians when she inquired in 1979. The archive had no record of receiving them. Before we move forward, if this matters to you, subscribe and ring the bell. We cover buried investigations like this one every week. If you're the kind of person who notices when the official record stops before it should, you belong here. There is a pattern here that goes well beyond New York and it is worth tracing carefully. What Gerald Oakes described in 1947, a sealed underground corridor lined with preserved documents, was not the first time something of this nature had surfaced in connection with Carnegie-affiliated properties. In 1931, a plumbing crew working on a Carnegie branch library in Pittsburgh broke through a basement wall during a renovation and found a sealed chamber containing iron shelving and what the crew foreman described as bound ledgers and boxes, possibly hundreds of them. The foreman, a man named Arthur Delaney, who had been doing structural renovation work in Pittsburgh for 20 years, said the shelving was anchored differently from anything he had seen in a residential or commercial basement. The iron brackets were oversized, built to hold significant weight, and the ceiling height of the chamber exceeded the standard construction specifications for a utility room by nearly 3 feet. Someone had built that room to hold a permanent collection. Not storage. A collection. A supervisor was called. The chamber was resealed within 48 hours. The Pittsburgh Press ran a 2-paragraph item about it on page 11. By the following week, the press had published a correction stating that the crew had discovered an old coal storage room that had been mistakenly described. The foreman's name was Arthur Delaney. He gave a brief account to his parish priest, a Jesuit named Father Michael Coyne, who noted it in his personal diary. That diary was donated to the Duquesne University archives by Father Coyne's family in 1964. In Chicago, 1938, workers excavating the foundation of a building adjacent to a former Carnegie-funded institution on South Michigan Avenue found a connecting tunnel that terminated at what a construction engineer on the site described as a heavy iron door, padlocked, with no external mechanism for opening. The engineer's name was Frank Sorensen, a Norwegian immigrant with 22 years of structural work in the city. He filed a report with the city's building department. That report was marked reviewed and closed 4 days after submission. The tunnel was filled with concrete before the end of the construction season. The iron door, according to Sorensen's own account written in a letter to his son in 1952, was never opened. He wrote, "I asked what was behind it, and the project supervisor told me it was my last day on the job." Pittsburgh, 1931. Chicago, 1938. New York, 1947. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. The Carnegie Corporation has never adequately addressed several specific questions about its early real estate holdings. It has never explained why 3 separate subgrade spaces connected to its properties were sealed and reclassified in municipal records between 1922 and 1947. It has never explained why Heinrich Vollrath, a man employed under contract to acquire and store documents pertaining to the governance of men, has no recorded departure, no pension filing, and no subsequent professional trace after 1911. It has never explained why Raymond Shear's 78-page property inventory, which describes undisclosed sub-basement archival space, was received by the board and then treated as if it had never been submitted. Why would the corporation terminate a 14-year facilities veteran within hours of his reporting a discovery, unless the discovery was something they already knew was there? Why do the board minutes for February 1922 contain no reference to a formal property inventory that was submitted to them that same month? Why would Frank Sorensen, a 2-decade veteran of Chicago construction, lose his position on a job the day he asked a question about an unmarked iron door? These questions do not go away because institutions refuse to answer them. But here is what makes this case different from every other account of sealed archival space connected to a Gilded Age institution. The witnesses described above, Oakes, Shear, Delaney, Sorensen, are all men who stumbled into the story accidentally. Blue-collar workers and mid-level professionals who had no stake in finding anything remarkable and no incentive to invent it. What Margrave found in the 3 years he spent quietly investigating his brother-in-law's account, is a paper trail that suggests the construction and maintenance of that corridor was not an improvised decision. It was a program, planned at the institutional level, maintained across decades, and protected by the kind of coordinated response that is only possible when multiple people in positions of authority already know what they are protecting and why. In 1991, when Philip Margrave's daughter donated her father's papers to the Westchester County Historical Society, the archivist who processed the collection, a woman named Dr. Susan Fenwick, who held a doctorate in archival science from Simmons College and had spent 11 years cataloging private papers collections, discovered that Margrave had done considerably more than simply write down Oakes's account. Margrave, who had worked in Army intelligence during the war and understood the value of documentation, had spent 3 years quietly investigating what his brother-in-law had described. He had cross-referenced property records, contacted former Carnegie employees through veterans networks, and traced building permit histories through the city's municipal archives. In those papers, Dr. Fenwick found a folder containing photocopies of 4 documents. The originals, Margrave noted in his own handwriting on the folder's cover, had come from a source at Columbia who wishes no attribution. The documents included a partial lease agreement for the East 22nd Street property, showing a sub-basement addendum dated 1919, a 1-page memorandum on Carnegie Corporation letterhead referencing the conveyance of the lower archive to standing preservation protocol, and, most remarkable, a floor plan, hand-drawn, unsigned, showing a corridor running beneath East 22nd Street for what the notations indicate is approximately 340 linear feet, lined on both sides with labeled shelving bays. The labels on the bays are not book categories. They are names, family names, institutional names, some of them recognizable to anyone who has spent time studying the financial history of the early 20th century. Dr. Fenwick notified the Historical Society's director, who notified the State Archives liaison, who, according to Dr. Fenwick's own account, given in an interview published in a small Hudson Valley historical journal in 2003, received a telephone call from an attorney representing the Carnegie Corporation within 10 days of the notification. Dr. Fenwick was told that the documents in question were proprietary materials that had been acquired improperly. The society returned the folder. Dr. Fenwick left the society the following year. She told the interviewer in 2003, "I had photocopied those 4 documents before I reported them. I still have those copies. I do not know what to do with them." The corridor beneath East 22nd Street still exists. The building above it has changed hands twice since 1947 and now houses the offices of an international foundation. If you visit the block today and ask the building's management about subgrade construction, they will tell you the basement is used for mechanical systems. The building permits on file with the New York City Department of Buildings show 2 basement levels. Raymond Scher's 1922 inventory described 3. The discrepancy has never been corrected. The floor plan in Margrave's papers, the one Dr. Fenwick photocopied before returning the originals, shows those 340 linear feet of shelving running in a direction that would place it not only beneath the Carnegie property, but beneath a portion of the adjacent block as well. If that floor plan is accurate, whatever is down there did not belong solely to one building. It belonged to a network, and that is a different proposition entirely than a single eccentric millionaire building a private vault. Somewhere beneath that block of Manhattan, in a corridor that Gerald Oakes walked through by kerosene lamplight in the autumn of 1947, there are wooden shelves bolted into stone walls. The cedar and the wax did their work. Whatever was placed there to be preserved was placed there to last. The official history of Carnegie philanthropy tells us that a man built libraries because he believed in learning. What the documents tell us, the contracts, the inventories, the sealed chambers, the floor plans, the terminated workers, the photocopied papers that a retired archivist in upstate New York still holds in a folder she does not know what to do with, is that at least some of what Carnegie built was not meant to be found. Not by everyone. Not without permission. The people who were meant to find it knew where to look and what it was. The people who found it accidentally, Oakes, Delaney, Sorensen, Scheer, were removed from the vicinity within days. The pattern does not require you to believe anything. It requires only that you notice it. The honest answer is that we do not know with certainty what those shelves hold. What we know is that multiple independent witnesses in multiple cities across more than 2 decades described the same thing, and that each time one of them spoke, the official record moved quickly to ensure they would not be heard again. These records survive because people refused to stop asking. If you've made it this far, you are precisely the kind of person those records were sealed to keep in the dark. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it. History doesn't disappear when it's buried. It disappears when no one looks for it. And the people who sealed these corridors were counting on exactly that. Next week, I'm pulling a thread that connects the Carnegie sub-archive to a name that appears twice in Margrave's documents and once in a 1904 Rockefeller Foundation internal memo. The name belongs to a man who died in 1929 under circumstances that have never been fully explained. A physician, a documents curator, and a man who, according to one source, had been granted access to 4 separate sealed archives across 3 American cities, not by accident, but by invitation. You won't want to miss it.